Welcome to Why Sew, the podcast where some of your favorite sewing personalities and rising stars share what motivates them to create using needle and thread. I'm your host, Jason Prater, and with me today is Jennifer Tryon. I'm super excited to get to speak with our favorite sewing personality from Canada and find out why she sews. So welcome to Why Sew, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's awesome to get to talk to you again. It seems like it's been forever.
Well, the world has changed a lot since people saw each other in person. It's sort of like the sewers of the world said, hey, we need an excuse to stay home and sew. And here we are.
Hey, thank God they did. I mean, 2020 at least was a fantastic year. And the first part of 2021, even before people really started getting out and doing stuff again.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think the resurgence in sewing was a long time coming, pandemic or not, because I do think people, love the feeling of making. And right. I think when you get a little taste of doing things for yourself and anything homemade, that's a feeling that sticks that we should be chasing. And, it's a blessing that's come out of this pandemic, I think, is that a lot of people were re-exposed to some good old-fashioned fun,
Absolutely. Hey, before we get going, I'm sure many of our listeners know you from seeing you on Home Shopping Network or TSC in Canada, or maybe even your new HomeMade website. Not as in you made it homemade, but maybe you did that too. I don't know. But the name HomeMade. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I mean, do you consider yourself a sewist, sewer, seamstress, tailor, quilter, crafter, omni-crafter? How do you consider yourself? Maybe it's all of that. Tell us a little bit about who Jennifer Tryon is as a sewer.
Well, so I'm going to just take it back to how I got here because it's a bit of an interesting story, I think. I was a national news correspondent for almost 20 years.
Oh, wow.
And I worked on the national news in Canada for the last 10 years, global national news, and was with CTV News before that and traveled all over the world on big breaking news stories. And I was always traveling with a craft project because we were constantly getting stuck places. I'd be going to some hurricane or some, natural disaster or some sort of war zone. And the story would be over, but I'd still be there because the airport would be closed there'd be a lapse in time. And so I remember my cameraman always saying to me, do we have to lug this sewing machine everywhere we go? I would literally bring my sewing machine with me. And I had 3 young kids, very young kids. I still have 3 kids who are still pretty young. And I'd be bringing fabric and thread and sewing them pajamas at night when I had power, if I was somewhere that had power. Otherwise, I'd be knitting or drawing or something. And it was a way that I could feel close to them.
Oh, wow.
So, and provide for them when I wasn't there. And, sewing kind of saved me because that feeling I talked about before of making, it was in direct contrast to what I was feeling on these news stories, in these disasters, in going and witnessing so much suffering. It really took me back to, I need to get myself to a place where I feel good every day. And this is not to ignore the suffering in the world at all, but it's for me to live my most authentic life. We hear that a lot, but it's true. Like I couldn't find the passion in news anymore. It felt like I had done it over and the same story over and over and over again. And, I was at the Boston Marathon bombings and I thought, wow. I can't, there was literally Black Hawk helicopters, coming down in front of us. We could hear the gunshots when they finally apprehended one of the brothers. And in my mind, and my mom was messaging me saying are you okay? And I remember saying to my mom, could you just check Twitter? Can you stop calling me? And I thought, this is not right. This is not how it's supposed to be.
Wow.
And literally working for a week straight at that story. And my cameraman looked at me at the end and said, you're done, aren't you? And I was like, I just need to go home and bake something or sew something. And it was literally how I was escaping. And I remember being, at this other store in New York when Hurricane Sandy hit and there was no power in like so much of New York. And the only thing we could find to eat was chicken McNuggets from McDonald's. Didn't even have fries left. It was like, there was nothing. We were like, we'll take them.
McDonald's with no fries. No.
Yeah. Like, cause there was no power anywhere somehow. Anyway, we're eating this garbage and we're like we had to sleep in the van because there's no power anywhere. And we're in the lineups for gas. And I just thought, why? And I'm frantically like knitting, sewing, cross-stitching. And I know what I'm doing. I'm like trying to medicate myself with something good. And so HomeMade was born because the feeling of doing something yourself and making something is so good. It's so good. It helped me so much in all of those times that I just want to pay it forward. I want to help people make things themselves. So whether that's sewing or whether that's just whatever it is.
That's so cool.
I do dabble in lots of things, sewing primarily, but yeah, that's why.
I hear so many different stories like that, but not that specific twist, right? I mean, you were experiencing such a divergent worlds there, right? But, if I take you even further back, I mean, you were carrying crafting and sewing projects with you on the road while you were doing this, but surely you got started even earlier than that, right? What was your earliest memory of sewing or crafting?
My earliest memory of sewing is not me doing it at all. It's seeing my grandmother and a bunch of women in like the church basement with a big loom, like a big quilting loom in front of them. And they were all quilting. And I was quickly told to skedaddle. There was no reason for me to be there. I was going to go outside and play. This was not a world that I was like, come and help and learn, because I was witnessing a means to an end, not, a cool hobby that, is trending, right? I was witnessing like ladies, making quilts for people who needed blankets for warmth, not for decor, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so my grandmother lived with us growing up. And so everything was homemade, but not because it was cool. It was because it was necessary. And but yet I'm from a generation where you don't actually need to make your own clothes, and neither does your parents. Like, you can just go to the local Walmart and, get something pretty inexpensively, and you'll be just fine. But my grandmother, night after night, sewed in front of us, knit in front of us, cooked in front of us. She lived that life, and I saw it, even though as a child I didn't participate in it. And it wasn't until I moved away from home and went to university that I suddenly, and I guess maybe being away from home, I didn't have any exposure to that. I didn't have anyone like cooking or making anywhere in my life. It was like studying and partying and like all the stuff that students do, And I immediately, in this big house that I lived in with a bunch of like guys and girls, like kind of like a frat house, set aside the space in the dining room just for sewing and crafting. And I was like the lamest kid in school. And I just started and I'd be like, hey, to my roommates, does anyone want to come and make a whatever with me? And they'd be like, no.
So you've been using sewing as an escape for a long time.
I think so. I think now that I'm kind of thinking of it that way, and I didn't really have any skills. So I really just had to kind of harness this passion that I had inside.
So wait a minute. Let's paint this picture. So you're in basically a frat house.
Yes.
And you're like, I remember my grandmother's sewing. I think I'm going to start sewing. So what'd you do? You go out and buy a sewing machine? What happened here?
Yeah. To be honest, I don't think I was so conscious of the choice. I think it was a pulling. There was something pulling me to do this. And maybe it was my grandmother. Maybe it was like this, but there was something in me that was like, you need to make something. You need to, I felt the urge. I had to. And so, I just went and bought like a $99 sewing machine and like the worst, linted up thread from whatever bargain basement, and like would cut up shirts or get little scraps of whatever. And, I did tons of different crafting, and it was all terrible. Like if I was to look at it now, but it doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter, because at the time, what it did for me and what it does for most people gives you something fun to do, something cool to do, something, it's not always a means to an end. Like my grandmother, would have
Right.
had it be. Like I remember just painting a wooden clock and getting the stuff to like the gears to go. And I remember my boyfriend at the time, like sitting like in the Michael's parking lot going like, are we ever going to get out of here? Like, what are you doing in there? Like, and
That's fantastic.
I couldn't explain it. It's only now looking back that I can kind of put some real reflection to, wow, that maybe really was a strong influence in my life. And maybe that was the steady, calm, homemade feeling that now that I've developed the company HomeMade, that I just want to bring to more people.
That's fantastic. So did you at any point, after you get into this sort of sewing pool, there you go.
Vacuum.
When you get into this sewing vortex that you got in, did you ever go and get any professional training or help from, your local sewing machine dealer or anything like that?
No.
All self-taught.
Not one time.
That's
not one
awesome.
time did I, because what I lack in skill, I make up for in confidence. That's always been my way.
Make it till you make it.
That's right. I think, eventually you will catch on. And if millions of people have been sewing around the world in countries that, are much less developed with far fewer supplies, I think I can probably handle it on Janome top-notch machine with the beautiful sulky threads and, all of this great stuff, right?
Yeah, for sure. That's so cool, though. So what do you like to sew then? Like, what do you like to do? What is your favorite thing?
Yeah, I love quilting. I love making quilts. And I think it's probably like because we grew up with quilts on our beds. And I took them for granted. I was like, oh yeah, I don't know, that's just my covers. Like my childhood blankets were.
With no regard for the hours and hours of work that went into it.
Definitely not. Or I wouldn't have eaten on the bed like I did. Or I wouldn't have, had the fur part.
Put your makeup on while sitting cross-legged on your bed. Yeah.
Exactly right. But you know what? And I said this to someone recently who I gifted a quilt to for Christmas. And she said, oh, but I couldn't possibly use this. And I said, no. Quilts are meant to be used and loved and washed and dried and washed again and use it, and because it won't die. And what I know is that blankets and warmth, especially on kids, they imprint on you. I remember the covers I had as a kid, even though I took them for granted, they imprinted on me. And oftentimes we think, oh, but the blanket I should be taking to my kid's baseball game or to the arena, because I always take a big quilt to the arena to when my son's playing hockey. And they think, I hear a lot, why are you bringing that good quilt to the arena? Because A, it's warm. And my kids are under this quilt. It's going to imprint on them. They're going to remember this. We should not be imprinting ourselves with a $10 blanket from Walmart or wherever, because these are the memories that we're going to take us through to when we look back on when we were a kid. And I think of my childhood bedroom. I remember that quilt. It's there. It's not doing anything, but it's imprinted on me.
That's a pretty profound thought. But now that I think in my own life, my grandmother made lots of scrap quilts, and I literally have 2 of them in my ottoman at home now that I use on my easy chair. They're all torn up. One of them actually has, she wasn't a fancy quilter and everything was hand tacked, but one of those quilts, my grandfather was in a really bad accident, was burnt 70% of his body. And he spent, many, many months in the hospital. The batting in one of these quilts is literally the blankets that they used on him in the hospital. So yeah, you saying that, it's like, you remember that stuff. And just as a kid, I remember all these fabrics, these were the same fabrics that she was walking around in shirts made out of. They're on this quilt. That's
exactly right.
It is very, very true what you say. It imprints on you. I love that. Well, you walked right into this already, but I'm sure you give many hand-sewn gifts. Is there ever a particular one of those that sticks out to you that's particularly memorable or meaningful to you in some way?
For sure. So this was just maybe 2 years ago, maybe longer, got a new sewing machine that had like lots of very cool features. And I was trying to think of something because Janome had tasked me with, because I was going to be on HSN and the shopping channel in Canada, and they were always wanting me to do projects for them. And I should mention, because, you know, there is the TV connection, that my two worlds, TV and sewing, did merge, which is how I came to do all of these TV shows. But anyway, I was doing, you know, projects for, I don't know, some show. And Janome said, you know, see what you can come up with using the Janome S9, which is, you know, great machine. And it runs off of like an app. My grandmother would just be like, what? Like, what are you doing? And I thought about her.
Oh, I'm just using my phone to control my sewing machine.
Exactly. She would be like, what? Oh, Lord. She'd be, Lord, come on. Anyway, so what I could see that it could do was it could stitch out whatever you would draw in the app. And I thought, So I said to my mom, do you have grandma's recipe for butter tarts? Because she was famous for making these butter tarts. Everybody, all my cousins and aunts and uncles, grandma's butter tarts. If she's coming over, she's bringing you the butter tarts. Yum. And there's only one copy of the recipe, but everybody loves it. But there's only one copy. My mom has the handwritten copy. And so I took a photo of the recipe and I traced it in this app. So it looked exactly like her writing, because it's exactly, and embroidered it on tea towels. And I did it on the show. And yes, the machine sold like a bazillion of them, because it's true. Like, I just took my grandmother's handwritten recipe and put it on this tea towel, but I sent them to all my cousins and my aunts and uncles, and everybody recognized grandma's writing right away.
That's so awesome.
Yeah. So that was a good one.
Those will be around in those households for a while, you think?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, like everybody, and now they all have the recipe, their own handwritten version. And yeah, that was a good one. When you can, because it really encompasses all of the things, right?
Yeah.
It encompasses like my love of making things and giving things. It also encompasses like my grandmother's, recipe, which is the whole reason this is all taken off anyway. So
it's such a connector, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's too cool. So you have had the opportunity to demonstrate and sell and show all sorts of fun things, but what are some of your favorite things to use when you're sewing, whether gadgets, gizmos, notions, tools? What are some of your favorite things to use? Your I can't do this without it stuff. What are those things?
For sure. So I can't. I think water soluble stabilizer is like Fabri-Solvi is the most genius invention of this century. Like, it's amazing. I cannot have less than a full bolt available to me at any one time. So in case anyone's wondering what this is, it's water soluble stabilizer. You can hoop up or use in lots of different ways, but it allows you to wash away the stabilizer. So you can sew into it like it's fabric and then just dunk it in water and it will disappear. And that's how I did the tea towels. That's how I've done some of my favorite things with freestanding lace. Yeah. And I love Sulky's Fabri-Solvi. I love it.
It's pretty interesting to hear you say that as a sort of side story there. The way that our founding partners, Fred and Joyce on the creative marketing side, the way they came to be involved with our manufacturing partner on the Ganold side was through water soluble stabilizer at a large trade event on the industrial commercial sewing side called the Bobbin Show many, many, many years ago. And through that meeting, Fred and Joyce started selling our original Solvi, our film Solvi, that Ganold was distributing or selling to the commercial embroidery world at the time. But that is literally the product that brought those people together to form our company over 35 years ago.
Well, I love it.
I know.
I love it.
So I'm glad that's one of your favorites.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites for sure.
So, clearly you've taken this hobby that wasn't so much of a hobby until later years for you, but you've taken that and turned it into a business. So, how would you say or describe the opportunity that sewing has given driven for enriching your life? I mean, I think everything you've said up to this point maybe is kind of that, quite frankly, but how would you sort of encapsulate that or describe it?
I think everything I've said, you're right, kind of has answered that question, but I can kind of reverse engineer it too, because what I now have to do is protect sewing. And because I've already explained how, yes, it's enriched my life in this way for sure. It's now become my full-time job. So I now have a responsibility of not letting work ruin my precious hobby. So I just want to flip that question because, it's evident that it's enriched it. I left news. I work full-time still on TV, but now doing sewing and crafting segments, so this is so great, like it didn't happen overnight, but yeah, I was able to create a job, a good one out of my passion. So now I have the responsibility to protect that and not ruin something with what business and work can do to things, because sometimes it involves money and deadlines and all the contracts and, all of those kind of like can be ugly things. I just have a real responsibility now to make sure that it stays what I need it to stay being in my life.
Yeah, that can be the problem with turning your hobby into a business, right? I've seen that in not just in the sewing world, but in other examples, but certainly in the sewing world, I've seen people, very successful people in our business, not sew for many, many, many years until they had a chance to retire or push back from it and then get back into the actual hobby. So it's very good for you that you see that already and consciously try to protect it. That's words of wisdom for all those out there that, and there's a lot of them that are trying to make a business out of their passion.
And they should, because if it's the thing that they're doing for free or doing like I was when I was still working in news, like late at night, or, my kids would often wake up
with it.
That's right. If if you can do that in the waking hours and someone will pay you to do it, hey, all right, that's great. But I spent a long time wondering, but how much can you really make? Can I actually replace my income? I was a network news reporter at the national level. We got a mortgage here. We got to pay the bills. I have 3 kids, I married for love. We have to work around here. So yeah. And I didn't start with the company. The company HomeMade only came kind of at the beginning of the pandemic when I kind of saw people are at home. People need this feeling now more than ever. And that's how HomeMade really started, where we, are putting on events because I have the ability at home to broadcast on actual television. We've been broadcasting from here for the last 2 years on lots of shows that I do. We've got a full TV studio in the basement. And that's sort of my, I guess, advantage, from having such a strong TV background, is that, I could hit the ground. I was already doing this before the pandemic. So, I didn't miss a beat in terms of being able to broadcast live from home. And I thought, well, what if we set aside a weekend and, we bring some of the tutorials that I've been doing to people live. And, I was doing some already with some paper crafting companies and they were great. And I thought, what about sewing? And it just kind of was born. We've done 3 or 4 events now, send people a big box full of everything they need. I squealed the day all the sulky thread we ordered arrived. I thought, look at all these hundreds of spools. This is awesome. And, we shipped everybody all the fabric, all the thread, all the stabilizer, everything they need to pull off the project or projects. We do lots of them on the weekend. And then we just broadcast live to everybody's home and they follow along and we all make the projects together at home, homemade.
I love
and it's sort of a modern spin on that.
That's so cool. Yeah. The pandemic has forced us all to think outside the box, right? And how we can continue to bring sewing to the masses. I mean, with no in-person events happening for virtually 2 years, it's cool to see people coming up with fun ideas like yours and being successful with that. That's awesome.
It's so cool to see hundreds and hundreds of sewers, hundreds signing up, which is great. But then the thrill of seeing, like, we just finished a virtual quilting retreat, and we sent everybody the pattern and the fabric, the thread, and the batting, the bait, like everything you need to make this quilt from start to finish. And we're bossing it up and da-da-da. And now it's like, it's make a quilt by Christmas, which is what we did. And to see all of these hundreds of people who've made the same quilt on my watch, and I wouldn't profess to be a quilting expert. I'm making it along with them, but we're all doing it together. We're in it together. And it's just a sign of the times, right? But it's a good spin on it. It's a beautiful, heartwarming spin on it. And when I see all the posts and everyone putting on Instagram and Facebook and tagging me and in the private group that we run for the event, like, wow, look at all the versions of this quilt that everybody in all of these different cities and states and provinces and countries around the world are holding on to their quilts, and people are snuggling up under them this time of year. It's really bonding.
I love how you are so in tune with this emotional side of sewing and how it connects people and how it makes people feel. You just keep going back to that, not even knowing you're saying it, but you're always talking about the emotional impact of it. That's so cool. I know in our industry, there are so many just really strong people, predominantly women, that have taken similar tracks, whether they were in a different career and then turned that into sewing, or whether it was just their hobby and they were a stay-at-home mom and turned that into a business. Many, many, many stories like that, some of which are hugely successful people. I just wonder, are any of those people, are there any other sewists or makers in our business that you particularly look up to, or who have helped you in some way, shape, or form in your own journey?
Wow, that's a good question. It's funny because I hate to say that I don't have an answer, but from the seat that I was in before, where I was leaving my job to make this my new job, I hadn't worked in this industry at all. Not once. In fact, I was being offered the Washington bureau chief job when I had to turn it down. And, we were getting ready to move to Washington and I was like, I can't, I was saying yes to the executive producer who called me up. Mm-hmm. But in my mind, I was screaming no. So all I knew is I was going towards something I wanted to do, but I didn't really have any sort of professional role models because I wasn't in the profession at all. Instead, what I had was just like this desire to change. And, someone recently said, oh, well, in our industry, and I was like, our industry, like me? Like, am I like, I guess I'm in this industry now. I don't know. I still think I'm in TV. Like,
you happen to be in both.
I think I've straddled the line. And so now I'm looking around at people like Kimberly Nimo, everybody's like, but I'm more of a fangirl.
Yeah, it's okay to be self-taught and self-made, Jennifer.
Well, I mean, I hate to, I feel like I watch YouTube videos and I, see people in the industry the same way anyone else would, but not necessarily as a peer.
Yeah, that's cool. So you do a lot of different crafting, and probably more than many of the folks that I've spoken with. But is there a particular type of sewing or type of project or something that you have yet to try your hand at that's sort of on your I got to do this list, or your sort of sewing bucket list, if you will, that you've been eyeing and just hadn't had the opportunity yet, or hadn't created the opportunity?
Well, I really think I need to make a quilt coat. And not because I think they look that nice, because I got to say, I've yet to see one where I'm like, yes, I should wear that out. But I am totally enamored by this trend of turning your quilt into a coat. I think I might actually turn one into a house coat, and like make it a robe. Yeah, I don't think because I'm trying to, fresh spins and all of that.
It's kind of like like a meshing together of a snuggly and a
Yes,
robe.
That's right.
Together.
That's right.
Okay.
Exactly.
But with the look of a quilt.
That's right. That's what I'm going to try to do. Someone's going to beat me to it because they're going to hear that on this podcast and I will have dragged my butt.
You better hurry up.
At least tag me in it, you guys. But yeah, I do think I want to try that. In terms of like a technique, I really want to get better at like bobbin work. And the reason why is not to actually sew, it's to scrapbook.
Explain bobbin work to our listeners, because for so long, that's something that always eluded my understanding. What do you mean when you say bobbin work?
So I want to put a thicker, fuller thread in my bobbin and, a regular sort of 40 or 50 weight thread up top. And I want to sew on paper with the bobbin thread. And
so the bobbin thread is actually what's going to be on the right side of the thing that you're trying to sew. That's
right.
Okay.
Right. And I think that because there's a real trend in scrapbooking to hand stitch using like embroidery floss. And I feel like if, someone like me could get together and teach people that they don't need to spend 8, 9, 12 hours hand stitching this image with floss on their piece of paper, but instead we could run it through our machines with these heavier, thicker threads. Not only would, the sewing machine companies have, thousands of new customers, but there'd just be a new technique would be born and all of these hours of labor would be saved. And, sometimes I think about, am I cheating by embroidering? Am I cheating by no, I think and I think about my grandmother again. No, she would have given anything for some help. So she would have said, take whatever help you can get. If there would have been a machine that could have helped me, I would have taken it. So,
think what she could have done with a long arm quilting machine.
I think what I could do with that. Yeah. So that's something I really want to get better at is, putting different weights of thread, heavier weight threads in the bobbin and seeing what I can create with those.
Cool. So what are you sewing right now? Are you working on anything special right now for you or for your business?
Well, I am two things. For me, I am quilting in the hoop at the moment. So the quilt that I just finished for our virtual quilting retreat, I did a lesson on how to quilt in the hoop. So that's where you take, like an embroidery design that's meant for quilting.
Right.
And it looks like a long arm design, but you have to hoop it like hundreds of times.
Are you using like your biggest hoop for that? Or are you using
but my biggest
a normal
hoop's not
size?
that big.
A normal size hoop?
It's only like 9x7. It's not that big.
Okay.
It's the biggest one that my machine has, but there are definitely bigger out there. So I'm working on that for myself. And then company-wise, we're launching a subscription box. Wow. And it's called the HomeMade Life box. And in it is 3 projects and some other craft goodies. And what we're going to do is, and you'll get it every season, and it's all the materials you need to have a more homemade life. And it's going to just be like just a good taste of some different things. So we'll have a little sewing project. We're going to have, I think we have a macrame in, we have some watercolor in, we've got some hand embroidering, cross stitch coming, soap making, candle, like all kinds of homemade things.
I love it.
So if you want to, give something new a try, this is a way of having everything you need to make it without having to, A, invest in it, and B, have us be able to walk you through how to do it, because we're going to do lives and, have it be super interactive. So the subscription box is what we're professionally sewing together.
Fantastic. So for someone to get that, they go to homemade.ca.
That's right.
That's where they'll find it. Fantastic. Yep. I love it. So tell us this, when Jennifer's not sewing or crafting, what other kinds of hobbies or activities does she enjoy? Like what would we find you posting about on your social media?
This is what you find me posting about. How many hours do you think we have in the day here? Well, I mean, I do have 3 kids, and so they keep me very busy. They all are in their own respective activities. You will see me hand stitching in the rink every single time I'm there. But I love mountain biking. I love doing kind of like anything to do with like going on the trail. That's sort of a family thing that we do. And I try to get the kids to do a lot of. We like being like outdoors like that. Of course, you said I live in Canada, so there's no shortage of snow, and right now anyway, and even though it was like minus 21 here today, it's cold for sure, but you just got to dress for it, and we get outside a lot. But yeah, I love crafting, and when I'm not working in crafting, that's what I am doing in my spare time. I love it. Yeah.
Well, you are truly, crafting is truly your life then, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I always in the podcast with this question, and I feel like we've already kind of answered it, but I'm going to ask it anyway, or tell you anyway. I've always kind of said as an industry, and you kind of started out with almost something like this, but I've always said as an industry that we're really not selling thread and notions and fabric, but what we're really selling is this feeling of accomplishment, a feeling of satisfaction that comes with crafting. And I know you said it a different way, but I'm going to ask anyway, you agree with that statement? I'm sure you do. And, how do you see just like, how can we as an industry bottle that up and sell it? What's like the magic trick for that? How do we get people to understand that side of it?
Yeah, I think it's being accessible, because I've seen it, because I, just like I couldn't really answer your question, like who do I, sort of emulate or whatever. It's because I'm just like a regular person making the projects like anyone else. And I really do think that it's obvious when you're being sold to by someone who doesn't live it themselves. And so if you have thread or fabric and the person who's, trying to sell it to you, their only experience with it is selling it, that doesn't sit so well with me. And so I know when I'm going on the shopping channel in Canada or HSN in the US, or even on my regular like DIY segments on some networks, like I would want people to know that I'm showing you how to do this because that's what I do when I use it. And that's the truth. Yeah. And I think that people know that, and you can tell. And so if companies are wondering like, well, I know people have said to me like, well, how did so many sewing machines sell when you were, and it's just like, well, I don't know, maybe people saw what I did with it and wanted to do that too. Or maybe they caught the feeling, and they want that too. And that comes from accessibility, authenticity, and not really putting the sale first. It's putting what this product can actually do for you first. And even if they have to use what they already have at home, I think that's okay. And I know that's not what the bean counters at the networks and in the companies I represent want me to lead with. But to be honest, I feel like, but eventually that person's going to run out of that old thread, and then a new love will have been born, and they'll remember who helped them get there authentically. And so that's good. And that is good for business, for sure. Absolutely. But I think helping the person and be accessible to them wherever they are, even if it's not with your product or not with your machine or not with your thread or not with your company, if what we're doing is really spreading the joy like we all say we are, then we have to be okay with them doing it however they're doing it. And so, yeah, I think when companies, just remember that you want to have real people who use this stuff and walk the walk touching your products, because that's who's going to really inspire everyday people like me and like the people listening.
Wow, there's so much truth in that for sure. I know our company got started by helping educate people and even educating retailers on how to educate people. So I can appreciate your authenticity there and your passion for doing that. So listeners, if you're looking for somebody that understands you, make sure you check out Jennifer and her company HomeMade in Canada. She's got a lot to offer. Clearly.
Aw, thanks, Jason.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed reconnecting with you. Maybe we'll get to see you again sometime on the road soon.
Yes, that would be amazing. Thank you for having me. Yeah. This has been really fun.
Thanks again, and we'll see you around, okay?
Okay.
Thank you for listening to Why Sew with Sulky. Visit sewingonline.sulky.com for more info on today's episode and to browse our educational offerings, including live webcast, videocast, and special events that you can watch in the comfort of your own home with your sewing machine by your side.